Hello, you are very welcome to this week's episode of Cut Through the Noise with myself, Aisling O'Rourke. Cut Through the Noise is the podcast that helps you increase your sales through elevated communications and marketing. And you are very welcome to this week's episode. It's hard to believe it now, but we are now officially a year old and we are into series 7 of the podcast. If this is your first time listening, you are most welcome. Please do go back and check out our back catalogue. And if you've been a loyal listener since we kicked things off back in start of 2024, thank you. Your comments, messages and support are always appreciated. And please do, if you're feeling generous, give us an all-star rating on Spotify podcasts, or even if you're feeling really generous, write us a review, or indeed on LinkedIn, you could give me a recommendation for the pod. But sincerely, thank you very much. Your listenership is greatly appreciated. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Alec Drew, and Alec is the business expert. I had the pleasure of speaking with Alec in the wake of a conversation he led at a meeting of the Professional Speaking Association of Ireland a number of weeks back. And I was fascinated when I heard him speak about the communications challenges around leading a multi-generational team. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Alec. And again, thank you once again for listening. Alec, you're very welcome to the Cut Through the Noise pod. We do love a conversation around communications here on the podcast. And I know that working on communications internally in businesses is something that you're quite invested in as well, and that you speak particularly around a multi-generational workforce. Now, I heard you speak recently, and I think in fairness, you do call a spade a spade. And the idea of having a multi-generational office or company, it's nothing new really, but we are learning more about how to communicate ever so slightly differently with people of different generations in order to make sure that everybody in the company is happy and therefore productive. But why, out of curiosity, has this become an area of interest for you?
I suppose from a very young age and leaving school and that and joining the bank and then moving off into the world of being an entrepreneur, if you want to use this sort of modern parlance for it, I was always interested in the whole idea of business. And what I discovered was that business is actually divided into two very simple components. And the first one is the knowledge, experience that you bring to a particular topic. So whether you're Google or whether you're actually running your own business, you have something unique to offer, and that's fine. So that's the offering. But the one thing that all of these companies and individuals have in common is the necessity to understand how to run a business, and that is very seldom taught anywhere. So everybody has to walk through that minefield and sort of navigate their way through it with the scars that go with it. Now, I remember my father when I was 16 saying, Alec, a wise man learns from the mistakes of others and a fool learns from his own. Unfortunately, being the fool, I carry all those battle scars as we go forward. And so therefore, I've always had a passion for showing people there is a shortcut. But you need to be on top of so many different parts of the business. And one key component part and most expensive part is your employees. And so many companies and organizations just don't get it.
You've brought me back to when I started working in radio and in media a long time ago now, but I remember being surprised by the difference in how people were treated depending on what department they worked in. And there was a feeling amongst those of us on air that those in the sales department got the cushier gig because, airtime can't be bought unless it's actual advertising. And particularly when I was in current affairs broadcasting, current affairs broadcasting can't be paid for. Only the ads on radio in particular can be paid for. So there was, for legal reasons, there was a bit of a Chinese wall between the two departments. But it never made sense to me because they had great contacts, you see, in the sales department because they were constantly out and about. They had the opportunity to be out and about more than those of us who had to be on air. So, and I remember like being pulled aside, oh, no, 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 we don't do this and we don't do that. But like that, it was this artificial separation instead of actually figuring out, well, actually, how can we work together and what are we allowed to do? Instead of assuming that the two parties couldn't speak at all when that wasn't actually legally the case. And like it can create such a massive impact, that discord between whether it's departments locally or local and national head offices. It can cost a business so much money if they don't have strong communications between all the teams, can't it?
Yes, and I remember speaking with a person who was appointed as the sales manager of a company that was in the food and beverage industry. And he was telling me the story that as he was sort of finding himself in the business, he went down to this massive warehouse, introduced himself to one of the store people, or store manager, I think it probably was at the time. And he said to him, how's everything, blah, de, blah. And the guy said to him suddenly, out of the blue, said, see over there, all those pallets. Yes, you're never going to sell that stuff. So he looked over and there was pallets upon pallets of cider. And he said, why not? Because nobody's trying to steal it. And that was his first insight into a bottom up information. So it's not always top down that is important.
Now, younger, and I don't care what generation you're from, but frequently, whatever generation you're from, you give the generation behind you a harder time of it, whether it's the snowflake or they're lazy or whatever it might be. We have stereotypes around particular generations. And like the one that drives me bananas because of the work that I do is this assumption that just because somebody's of Generation Z and they are good at using their mobile phone, automatically it's assumed in workplaces that that means they're digitally literate, which, being good at social media and being digitally literate are two very different skills. So, how do we like assess within our own businesses, within our own teams, how does looking at what generation a particular person is from help in how we communicate? Why is it important to take that on board as part of our communication strategy?
One of the greatest challenges that business face these days is the digital literacy of the younger generations. There's nothing wrong with that. However, what we have yet to sort of work out in our mind is how they're using particularly mobile devices. And what you're finding is, and there's plenty of support and documents out there, like there's a Udemy report on workplace behavior, shows that businesses are losing up to 30% of productivity per day on communications, the mobile phone or emails. In the old days, it was very handy. I might get up off from my desk, go over and ask you a question, you'll answer it, and
Mm.
I'll go back to my desk, and that's it all sorted. Nowadays, you'll see about 10 emails backwards and forwards. Or if I'm on my phone, of course, which most businesses don't actually give their employees a business phone, which they should do, and restrict certain things on it. What'll happen is there'll be a notification, and it's from somewhere like Travago. There's a great holiday in Lanzarote, and before I know it, I'm off for a half an hour having a look at that. By the way, that's at your expense. So we need to manage the difference in communications.
And like I see it, like I, as part of my work, I lecture in media. And typically the students are, now I've had students as old as in their 70s, but typically they're school leavers. And it's so difficult to get them to focus on what's happening in the room directly in front of them with the people that they're surrounded by because they are consumed by their phones. And I think, like, I grew up, I am the generation that that was around as a child when the internet was invented and we started getting computers into school. And I was a bit of a nerd in school. So the lovely nun sister Concepta, I still remember her to this day, put me in charge, and a colleague of mine. She knew we both had computers at home, so we were in charge of minding the computer in the classroom, because back then this was a major investment on behalf of the school. It was an expensive piece of kit. She didn't know how to use it and was learning herself. And we learned together with the teachers as we grew up through school. Whereas now, I think there's an assumption on behalf of perhaps teachers and parents of my generation, millennials. We just assume that they know how to do this stuff, that we don't actually have to actively teach them what's appropriate and what's not. We don't have to, you know, what's the difference between uploading and downloading a file, or making the access public or private. And all of these little things can be such an inconvenience if a new employee comes into a team and they just don't get it. And it's such a huge barrier for them in the workplace. And I wonder, you know, because it's not really being discussed, and I know you and I talk about it, but generally speaking, it's I would feel that businesses are losing out so much. Not only, okay, there is the distraction factor of mobile phones, but just they're not spending enough time actually training new staff on how their computer systems work. They assume that because they're young, they must know how to use the computer system.
Yes, and I fully agree with you on that. But I would take it just back one step in relation just to mobile devices. If I'm having a meeting, all mobile devices are left outside. Unless you're a heart surgeon waiting to perform an operation to save somebody's life, there is nothing going to come in on that phone that you need to have in your hand that cannot wait an hour. The productivity level of that meeting will rise exponentially, as it used to back in the day.
Mm.
It's simple things just like that. If you're creating an important document and it needs your full-time attention, you should be away from the noise, the phones, any notifications. They should be all turned off, because what people fail to understand is you could be 20 minutes into writing something. There's a notification of some sort that distracts you, but it actually takes 22 minutes for you to get your mindset back into what you were doing. Think of that 2 or 3 times a day, and the loss of productivity that believes, that it delivers. So that's just a starting point. Getting into what you're talking about in terms of the use of technology within an organization, I think it's very important that there's a team approach to what technology that we're going to bring in involving all the generations. It's very easy for some tech savvy person to say, let's go for the latest and greatest and we'll throw it at them. The young people will probably pick it up. And as you get older and older, the less they'll pick it up. And they don't want to be embarrassed by saying, I don't understand how this works. So they'll make a complete hames of it. And so the productivity that the company was hoping that would have been brought about by the use of this technology is now lost.
What about people who are managing teams and are listening to this and think, but surely is this just not simply a HR problem? I don't need to worry about it because I don't work in HR.
Or God love HR. I'll tell you what, that's an area of business. I won't even go into that. That's a minefield all of its own. But you're correct. You're correct in all of this. For example, and just as I move sideways on this, just to and come back then, for example, cybersecurity is a tech problem,
Mm.
when in fact it's everybody's problem. It's not just a tech problem. So don't try to shelve it off to somebody else. And the same with the whole embracement of technology. It's imperative that everybody is on board with this, understands what it's about and how to use it. Let's not have a small group of people leading a whole organization using technology that may or may not be relevant, but in which you're now isolating a good sector of the important part of your organization.
What then about members of the team who are perhaps slow to be willing to make changes when it comes to maybe new work practices or technology, whatever it might be. Because, and I don't care what generation you're from, like we all can get stuck in our ways at times, and that doesn't have, you don't have to be older to get stuck in your ways. You can be young and stubborn too. But how do we then work with these members on the team to convince them of the need for a particular change to come in, whatever it may be?
Yes, and I think what you do is bring together buddies from different generations. Somebody who's younger and more tech savvy, and somebody who's older but would have a better understanding of face-to-face communications, the advantages of networking, and there should be a sort of cross trade of skill sets, so that the young person it's explained to them the importance of you, for example, going out and meeting people and having conversations without this phone in your hand. I'll give you a good example of it. I was talking to a client recently, and the sales manager was out with one of his team, was a young person. And all he did was shadow him. He wasn't going to teach him, he was just going to observe him. So they went into an organization and they were with the managing director and they're walking through it. And it was a large organization where there was a big contract potentially at stake. And they walked down a corridor and there must have been about 10 framed jerseys from a GAA team. The young guy made no comment whatsoever about those, continued walking, and they passed a room in which there was 4 sets of golf clubs. And he missed that as well. There was an ideal icebreaker to say to the owner of the business, wow, I see that you are a huge follower of, let's say Galway, the
Mm,
Galway GAA team. And guess what? He will talk to you for hours about that, or mention the golf clubs. Oh, I see you're interested in golf. What handicap are you playing off? That's how you get a sale over the line. It's where you find something in common, get somebody talking about something that they've a passionate interest about, and then you can move on to other things. So you're breaking down barriers. That's an old skill the young people are missing. What the old people are missing is the advantages of technology, like the use of AI, doing the heavy lifting, say, around research. And all that takes is a slight upskilling in how to write prompts so that they can write documents and make things better by just doing some very simple things that are accessible to anybody, but the heavy lifting is now done for them. And once they see the advantage, they'll embrace that.
finally, then, when it comes to, and in particular, new people in a team who are working remotely, like I would look at my own career, and I've been blessed with some amazing mentors, either like even when I started my own business, I was really blessed with the mentors that came on board with me. But from day one, I was lucky that I had maybe managers or colleagues that were willing to take me under their wing and I could learn from them. And a lot of that learning, I realize now in hindsight, was happening without me realizing it because I was physically in the office with them. I could see what they were doing in their day to day, and I was learning from them. Or if I ran into a problem, I could quickly lean over and go, listen, Alec, how do I do this again? Remind me, I've just forgotten. Now, when we do have, and I think personally, I benefit from hybrid working. I'm not complaining about it at all. But I do have a concern around new people to a company, regardless of their age. If they're at home away from the team, how do they pick up the culture of the company, the way things are done, the practical things? How can we make sure we're not missing a trick there in relation to how we communicate when we bring on new people to a team?
I think this all fits into the onboarding process. You will take somebody in. I'm presuming you're talking about we've got over the probation period of 6 months and now they've come in. But I would have hoped in the probation period that they would have been asked to meet up or go out with or turn up to some sort of office where they're meeting people at least 4 days a week. One of the most attractive parts of working for an organization is the ability to work from home. However, I think it's imperative that start with is meeting people, getting to know them. Who is my colleague? What do they do? What's the company all about? And I'm afraid that may mean attending 4 days a week in a face to face. But once we're through all of that, then we can use things as we're using here now. or Teams or use Zoom, and that can make people more accessible. However, I think there should always be part of the culture of the organization that there's a regular meetup of the people. And whether that's in a one to one for a coffee, like it can be as simple as that. uh, the difference it makes in terms of communications, and make them of different generations, because that's how they learn from each other. So, for example, I could be working for the same company for maybe 20 years, and I'm meeting you who've joined about a year ago. Uh, you'll be fascinated to understand that some of the culture and what happened. How did this company come
Mm.
about? What happened during the recession? This massive contract we got, this massive mistake that we made. And all of these things are vitally important for you to understand. And I'm also interested in you. What attracted you to this company? And and what are your ambitions around it? And how can I help you fulfill those?
And I think it really comes down to on both sides. And I know this is simplifying the conversation quite a lot, but it really does involve all sides putting the effort in to think about how you're communicating, regardless of the generation of the person you're trying to speak with.
I think it does. And if I was to leave with one vital piece that I think would make a substantial difference in whatever format that we're meeting up. Now, whether it's in an office or over a coffee or anything like that, there is an agreement that phones are turned off.
On that note, Alec Drew, the business expert, thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode of Cut Through the Noise with myself, Aisling O'Rourke.
Thank you very much, Ashling. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Cut Through the Noise with myself, Aisling O'Rourke. I hope that you have enjoyed listening to my conversation with Alec Drew. Please do feel free to connect with both of us on LinkedIn. I'm at Aisling O'Rourke and Alec is at Alec Drew, AlecDrew. I hope you found the conversation around discussing and managing multi-generational teams. Like I said, it's not a new issue, but we do know more about the importance of the impact of our communication in the workplace and how different generations might respond to a different way of doing things. I think I have three key takeaways from my conversation with Alec. Number one, ask for people to put the phones away. Alec is of the opinion that businesses should provide their employees with business phones. To be honest, I'm between two minds on that one, but I can see the logic behind it as well. So it's important that when you're having meetings, whether you're asking people to leave the phone outside or even just, on the table turned down, or at least ask them for the purpose of the meeting to turn off notifications or at least to put it on silent. I think as long as you can't see or hear the phone, it being in the room or not is irrelevant. And that's my take on that. The other key takeaway that I had for this is around the use of technology and really making assumptions on the basis of generation, whether that's that, oh, sure, that person's over 50, they're definitely not tech savvy, or sure, they're only 25, of course they know how to use this piece of technology. I don't like making assumptions, particularly in the workplace. So it's always worth organizing a conversation around any issue that is an area of concern. And in particular, when you're taking on board new staff, if you use tech as part of your work, which, let's be honest, most of us use some kind of technology, you have to sit down and ensure that a new person on any team is trained up properly, even if they claim to be tech savvy, because how you want things done might be very different to how they're used to doing things in other workplaces. Finally, then, it's around Alec's idea of a buddy system. And it's something that I haven't had the experience of benefiting from in a formalized way, but I know that in many industries it's actually quite common, and perhaps it's something that more industries can take on board. Buddying people up based on their length of service in a particular company could be incredibly fruitful. And yes, it does take you as the manager or the team leader to allocate time to these things, but actually, I think in the long run will save you money. So I do hope that you enjoyed my conversation with Alec Drew for this week's episode of cut through the noise. I can hear the dog wandering behind me, awaiting her food. So I better stop talking and get off this recording. But if you need help with your communications, if you're looking for some assistance in public speaking or indeed communications around how you're dealing with team members, do feel free to connect with me and to reach out. Drop me an email to hello@thecommunicationscoach.ie. I'd be more than delighted to assist. And stay listening to Cut Through the Noise with myself, Aisling O'Rourke. Don't forget, we have loads of podcast episodes in our back catalogue, and I'm sure you will find something helpful and of use to you there. Stay safe, have a great week, and remember that when content may well be king, clarity is key. Help you stand out from the crowd and cut through the noise.